A reading from The Life You've Always Wanted by John Ortberg. I am disappointed with myself. I'm disappointed not so much with particular things I've done as with aspects of who I have become. I have a nagging sense that all is not as it should be. Some of this disappointment is trivial. I wouldn't have minded getting a more muscular physique. I can't do basic home repairs. So far, I haven't shown much financial wizardry. Some of this disappointment is neurotic. Sometimes I'm too concerned about what others think about me, even people I don't know. I speak to someone with whom I want to be charming, and my words come out awkward and pedestrian. I'm disappointed with my ordinariness. But some of this disappointment in myself runs deeper. When I look in on my children as they sleep at night, I think of the kind of father I want to be. I want to create moments of magic. I want them to remember laughing until tears flowed. I want to read to them and make the books come alive so that they love to read. I want to have slow, sweet talks with them as they're getting ready to close their eyes, and I want to sing them awake in the morning. I look in on them as they sleep at night, and I remember how the day really went. I remember how they were trapped in a fight over checkers, and I walked out of the room because I just didn't want to spend the energy needed to teach them how to resolve conflict. I remember how my daughter spilled cherry punch at dinner, and I yelled at her about being careful as if she'd revealed some deep character flaw. I yelled at her even though I spill things all the time and no one yells at me. And then I saw that look of hurt and confusion in her eyes, and I knew there was a tiny wound on her heart that I had put there, and I wished I could have taken those 60 seconds back. I remember how at night I didn't have slow, sweet talks, but merely rushed the children to bed so I could have more time to myself. I'm disappointed. And it's not just my life as a father. I'm disappointed also for my life as a husband, friend, neighbor, and human being in general. I'm disappointed that I still love God so little and sin so much. I always had the idea as a child that adults were pretty much the people they wanted to be. Yet the truth is, I'm embarrassingly sinful. I'm capable of dismaying amounts of jealousy if someone succeeds more visibly than I. I'm disappointed at my capacity to be small and petty. I can convince people I'm busy and productive and yet waste large amounts of time watching television. These are just some of the disappointments. I have other ones, darker ones, and I'm not ready to commit to paper. Where does this disappointment come from? A common answer in our day is that it is a lack of self-esteem, a failure to accept oneself. That may be part of the answer, but it's not the whole of it, not by a long shot. The older and wiser answer is that the feeling of disappointment is not the problem, but a reflection of a deeper problem. My failure to be the person God had in mind when He created me. When I first read those words, around 15, 16 years ago, I had to put the book down because my eyes had filled with tears and I couldn't read anymore. And they were tears of sadness and relief. Sadness because I feel that disappointment too with myself, then and now in various ways, as he said, in trivial things and in much deeper, profound things. But even more than sadness, I felt relief. They were tears of relief that somebody was naming something that I too felt and realized the disappointment was a clue to something deep inside me that I also believe I was meant to be more than I am. There is a person out there, the me I'm meant to be, and my heart has a longing for it. I don't think I'm the only one. Back in the day when they used to have bookstores, I know they still have bookstores, but it was over the last probably 3-4 decades, the self-help section of the bookstore has exploded, bigger than any other section in the bookstore, as people try to better themselves, as to grasp the reins or the horns on what it means to become the me I want to be. And now with social media, Instagram and YouTube are full of 30 days to a new you, whether it's shredded abs or a new business or a new hair color or whatever it is, cranking them out by the millisecond. I think whatever stage of life you're in, whether you're young or old, whether you're well into a career or you're just at the outset of it, whether you're dreaming dreams or looking back on things, we realize there is something in all of us that longs to be more than who we are. That there is a picture, an idea, whether we can put it into words or it's just this ache in our hearts that all is not quite as it should be. There is a me I'm supposed to be, I was meant to be, I was created to be out there. And I think it's actually just part of what it means to be human. What's interesting is religion has an answer to that quest or that longing as well. Religion's answer is this, in a sense, to have our minds informed with some kind of information, things we need to know, religious information, spiritual knowledge, and our behavior conformed to religious behaviors, certain things. And whether that information is about the divine being or the divine beings or the holy book or where you go for the place of worship and what you're meant to do and the behaviors around those things to know, in fact, what you're supposed to do, that this is the substance of what religion says. Oh, this is what the you want to be. This is how you do it. You have your mind informed and your behavior conformed. And yet it would seem that the millions and millions and millions and millions of people that would identify with any kind of world religion, the Christian religion included, that it doesn't seem to result in really the me I want to be for many people. In fact, the data would seem to suggest, both anecdotally and statistically, that what has resulted in is feelings of superiority or inferiority. That not just among people who follow religion, but let's say the leaders of religions, priests, pastors, rabbis, imams, whoever, that there can become this superiority. If I know the things I'm supposed to know, and if I do the things I'm supposed to do, that results often in religious pride. It was someone, a pastor years ago, who said, pride is more at home in the pulpit, the preaching pulpit, than in the pub. His point is that often what religion does is create a feeling of superiority for those who are in the know, who have all the knowledge, and who live lives conforming to the behavior and to the ideals of said religion. Or on the other side, it creates a feeling of inferiority for those who do not know and do not behave, or do not know enough, or do not behave enough. And as I said, I don't think the Christian religion is immune. We can chalk things up to, or maybe many of us believe this idea, or were raised with this idea that to be a Christian is to know things about God, know things about the Bible, be able to recite memory verses, be attentive and committed to Bible studies, make sure you go to church this many times in a month, make sure you give this percentage of money, make sure you do that. This is the thing you need to know and the behaviors you need to do. And yet by every study you would look at, especially within our own country, people are leaving the Christian religion and every other religion in droves. The unaffiliated, non-religious box and the religious surveys is the largest percent of the population in Canada and the largest growing one. And what is shrinking the most is the Christian religion in our country. And so it would seem that it is not the solution to simply have information, to be informed in your mind, to be conformed in your behavior, is not creating the people I want to be. Which is why it's really good news, as we said last week, that Jesus never invited anyone to be a Christian. This may be news to you, but Jesus did not come to earth to start a new religion called Christianity and invite people to be Christians. It's actually language he never used. And so we started actually this series last week to say, don't be a Christian, because Jesus offers us and invites us into something so much better. And we're taking these 4 weeks to say, well, what is that so much better? What is the life that Jesus actually invites me into, more than just being a Christian or identifying with a world religion? And that this is good news for those of us that would say, oh yeah, I am a Christian. Or those of us that are maybe exploring, or perhaps those of you that say, yeah, I've stayed away from this because of all the reasons you just mentioned, superiority, inferiority, and everything around it. But we're taking these weeks, not only that you might understand, well, what is that life that Jesus invites us into? But how would I explain that to other people in everyday language who think, oh, this is just the Christian religion, and they might think of you as, oh, you're just a religious person. I generally, pretty much always, when someone says, oh, you're religious, I say, no, I'm not, but let me tell you what I am. And hopefully this would give you an explanation, words that you might be able to put to what your faith is really about. And here's the amazing news, right, about what Jesus invites us into is not to be informed by learning new stuff about God and about Jesus, although learning is good. It's not to be conformed to a certain set of behaviors, but to have your life transformed. That transformation is the goal. Transformation is what Jesus invites us into, to become the me I want to be, the person God created us to be, the person deep down I long to be. And we started last week by saying that begins with not being a Christian, but actually by being close to Jesus. That this whole thing is about a relationship of love with the God of the universe, that Jesus offers us love, a love relationship with him, a lifelong friendship. But today I want to talk about the second thing that Jesus invites us to be instead of being a Christian. And it's maybe the most surprising one, the most unexpected one. And it is this: to be known by Jesus. To be known by Jesus, not to know things about Jesus. It's good to know things about Jesus, but that's not what's going to lead to transformation. What leads to transformation is when we are known by Jesus. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, I am glad you asked, even if you didn't ask. I'm going to tell you anyways. We're going to actually look at a story in Scripture from the life of Jesus, and that's what we're doing all the way through these 4 weeks, that shows us an instance, an interaction where someone became known by Jesus. Someone Jesus sought out that they to know them, and how that changed their life and what it actually means for us. We find this account in the fourth biography of Jesus called the Gospel of John, or the Good News of Jesus according to John, one of Jesus' disciples. And just a little bit of a setup here. This takes place as Jesus spent a lot of time with his disciples, but at this point he leaves them and he goes towards a region and a place that Jews generally didn't go. Jesus was a Jew. He was going to this place called Samaria that Jews would generally go out of their way to avoid as they were traveling and walking everywhere. And Jesus goes to this place, particularly by design on his own, to a well just outside a Samaritan city. And Samaritans and Jews had a lot of animosity between them. Their bloodline kind of traced back together to the same place, but at some point the family trees split and they saw each other. The Jews saw Samaritans as like both in terms of what they knew and their minds and what they did. Their behaviors were not pure, not true, that they didn't have the truth. And actually Samaritans saw Jews the same way. And so there was a lot of animosity between them and really just avoidance and separation. Jesus goes right into the region and goes to a well that is just outside a Samaritan city, where wells were often outside there, where people would go to the place where they could get water and bring it back into the city. And we pick up the story in John chapter 4, and I'm reading a few verses from 7 to 26, 28, and 29. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jews wouldn't have even shared the same eating vessels with them. So this idea of even getting water from a jar that a Samaritan woman had was sort of preposterous. Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." She's not quite following him. She's like, "But sir, you don't have a rope or bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides," she kind of knows he's talking in a double meaning here. "You think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" Okay, so she knows a little bit of the religious history of the two people. Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." She's a little bit cynical, right? And she's like, "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." Jesus says what seems like a total non sequitur. "Go get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with. You've certainly spoken the truth." She must have been like, how does he know that? that Phyllis, she's such a big mouth. I wonder what she posted today, right? She's like, what? But she gathers herself. She does pretty well. She's like, sir, you must be a prophet. Like, how does he know this stuff about me? So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here at Mount Gerizim where our ancestors worshipped? Jesus replied, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, for salvation comes from the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father's looking for those who will worship him that way, for God is spirit. So those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. The woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? So the people came streaming from the village to see him. It's kind of a longer interaction here, but it is a beautiful and actually very complex interaction between Jesus and this person, helping us see what does it look like when Jesus knows someone, to be known by Jesus, and how that leads to a total transformation in her life. And even though the story and the details of our life is different, in our lives as well. Let me give you a little bit of context, because there's stuff that if you were a first century reader of this, you would have known, but we don't know because we're 2,000 years removed from it, and just some things that need explaining in the text. This context of this woman is that she was living with heartbreak and rejection. Just to be clear, if you were a woman in those days, you would never divorce a man. Very unlikely, because that would mean that you would be financially destitute. They did not see men and women in those days as equal. Jesus changed that. But in those days, while he was still living there, a woman had very little rights, and she was considered mostly property. And so if you divorced from your husband, it's not like there would have been an equal separation of estate and money and all of that kind of stuff. All of the property, family business, or whatever that you worked in would stay with the man. And you would be considered by your family, or at least the people around, as damaged goods. So the likelihood of someone reputable and wealthy and whatever marrying you again would be very low. And yet here we have this woman who's divorced again and again and again, which means she was constantly rejected, constantly set aside, to the point now where probably she couldn't get anyone to marry her. And so she's just living with someone right now. And so she would have felt heartbreak and rejection by man after man. And possibly would she have thought, maybe God seems to know some things about spirituality and worship and God. Would she have thought, oh, God looks at me like that? Like that's how, because I'm unclean or something, or I'm damaged goods. Along with that, she would have had a lot of social shame. If you look in the verse right before the one I read, it says it was noon. A few years ago, we took some people from our church to a team out in the Middle East. And we were there not in the summer season, and in the middle of the day in the desert, it's 38 degrees. But friends of mine who worked there would send me pictures of the temperature on their dashboard in summer, 52 degrees. You do not go out in the middle of the day. So why is this woman drawing water at the well in the middle of the day at noon? Normally you would have gone very early in the morning or late in the evening when it's cooler. Well, because she doesn't want to be seen. She doesn't want to know, to be talked to. There's probably, maybe she was told she wasn't allowed to be, or maybe it just got so toxic for her when she was there with the other women in the city that she just was like, I can't deal with that anymore. Too much shame, too much talking, too much criticism, maybe too much open rejection by all these other people. Maybe the other women, the other wives in the town would look at her a certain way, like she was somehow a threat to their husband or their marriage. And so she just comes at noon. So she's carrying not just rejection, but so much shame. And then she seems to know a bunch of stuff about her religion. This is where she's at, but Jesus seeks her out and he wants to know her. He keeps bringing up her greatest need, right? And he starts with this kind of foray into this, okay, yeah, you're here at the water, there's, the well. Let me riff on this water theme a little bit. And he says in verse 14, those who drink the water I give them will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. She had to know he was talking about something more than just the water at this well, because he says, he's putting his finger, there is a thirst in your life. There is an emptiness in you. You are parched and dry. And you keep looking for this and keep getting rejected. And there's an emptiness, a thirst inside you. And Jesus says, anyone who drinks what I give them will never be thirsty again. It will become a fresh bubbling stream on the inside of them, right? And think about this. They would dug down deep in the desert to find this fresh bubbling stream in the water that everyone from the village came because they couldn't live without water. Water is life. And Jesus says, I can give you something that would actually create a source of life from the inside of you, where you feel most empty, most parched, most dry. And it would give them eternal life. You can tell she kind of knows that that's something pretty significant, but she's cynical about it, right? She's like, oh, that would be nice. Yeah, you give me that water. And then Jesus puts his finger on her deepest need, the greatest point of pain in her life. He says, go get your husband, which seems like a total non sequitur, but she's like, what? And then she's like, I don't have a husband. And he's like, yeah, right. You're right. You've had 5 and the one you're with now is not your husband. And she would have been like, whoa, what this? Like, how did he even know this? And again, she's like taken off guard and she does pretty well. She's like, okay, so you're a prophet. And then what does she do? She goes right back to what religion says. Oh, what do you know? What's the things to know? And what's the behavior to do? She keeps redirecting. She keeps getting away from this very awkward conversation. And she wants to talk about stuff you know and stuff you do. Jesus is talking about the heart, about the inside of her, the emptiness inside of her, about the parts of her that need to be transformed. She keeps talking about the stuff about being informed and conformed. Well, you Jews say we're supposed to worship here, and the Samaritans say this, and she just redirects the conversation. But Jesus says, no, this is not about religion. Look what he says. He says in verse 21, the Father is looking for people. Right? This is not about religion. God is seeking people. In fact, God is seeking you out right here, right now. And he says he's actually looking for people who are going to worship in spirit and in truth. In other words, with an authenticity and a passion. The Spirit is what is on the inside of us. Jesus was pointing away from the outside, away from the head stuff that she knew and the behavior stuff that she was debating about, and clearly her own life had not lived up to and conformed to. But he points right to the inside. He says, the Father is looking for people. Man, she takes one last ditch at kind of just redirecting or, stonewalling him. And she says, well, in verse 25, well, I know Messiah is coming. And when he comes, he'll explain everything to us. In other words, like, who really knows? I know Messiah is coming one day. And when he comes, he'll sort all this out. And Jesus says, I just did. I just did. He says, I am the Messiah. I just explained everything to you. Not new information that you needed to know about God, not new behavior about which mountain you worship on and which is the right temple and place to go to. I just explained to you what you need to know most, which is God can fill the empty, parched, dry places in your life so that your own life can become like a well, a spring of living water bubbling up from the inside out, which is about transformation. Right? Information just touches the mind. Conformation or conformity just modifies the behavior from the outside. But transformation works at the deepest parts of us and works from the inside to change us from the inside out. And he's like, literally, I am Messiah. And she understands, this is what you've been talking to me about. Jesus gave her what she really needed. This hope, an explanation that God could actually give her something to fill her deepest need, that no other person, no other man, no other situation could give her, that would free her from the shame that she felt in the community that she was in, the emptiness and the brokenheartedness that she had from being passed on from one person to the next, rejected again and again, at times living on the edge of poverty, and Jesus gave her what she needed most, spirit and truth. That God is seeking people out to change them from the inside out so that they would worship him from their hearts and from their lives. And she finally gives in. Look what it says. It says she ran back into the village, basically saying, Jesus knows me. Jesus knows me. She gets it. She says, come see a man who told me everything I had ever done. Now think about this for a moment. Why was she at the well at noon? Because she didn't want to talk to anyone about everything she had done. They all knew what she had done, and she was trying to avoid it, avoid the shame, avoid the scorn, avoid the criticism, avoid the cut-eye, avoid the gossip, just avoid the annoying questions. And now she runs back into the village, not to say, look, hey, I learned some new information, or I know some stuff now, or I've figured out the whole worship thing, or whatever. She says, come see a man who told me everything I've ever done. Suddenly she's so open about everything she's ever done. Why? She's free. She's free. Because she's known by Jesus. And she goes right back to the place of shame and scorn without any shame in her life anymore, without any fear in her life anymore. Come see this man. You have to see this. He knows me. Friends, this is such a beautiful story of what happens when Jesus comes close enough to touch kind of the hard to reach, hard to talk about, hard to admit places of our life and offers us transformation, not just new information, not just to be conformed by behavior modification, but actually be transformed from the inside out. But it also shows us, right, just how difficult he is, right? Like she keeps redirecting the conversation away from where he's trying to go. No kidding. It's hard. Right? It's much easier to know things about God and the Bible and to try to sort of have some behavior modification to show up to church or whatever, or looking good in a certain way and try not to kill anyone and try not to steal. It's much harder to let Jesus know us, to let him go to those hard to reach, hard to talk about, hard to admit places. And the reason why we much prefer to know some things and to have some behavior modification is because when it's about what we know and what we memorize and Bible studies we can do, and YouTube, goodness knows we watch enough sermons on YouTube and listen to this person, when it's all about what we know and maybe trying to kind of live well, we are in the driver's seat. We are in control, right? We learn, we study, we can memorize, we can try to behave, we are in the driver's seat. But when we have to give Jesus access to those hard to change places in us, when we have to give Jesus access to the places of brokenness and hurt that have run so deep, the very soft spots of our soul, when we have to give Jesus access to speak to us about the things in our lives that we don't want to think about and don't want to admit, then we're not in the driver's seat at all anymore. We are not in control in that place. And the vulnerability there is scary. Right? We'd much prefer to just know some things. I can master that, right? Like they even call the degree that I got in seminary a Master's of Theological Studies, as if you could master knowing God. But right, that's the illusion we give ourselves. I can just master this. I can know enough. I can modify my behavior. But it's way scarier to be known by Jesus. But friends, this is a core part of what salvation is. Can I just say that? Like salvation is so much more than Jesus died on the cross for my sins. And if I believe that with my head, like this mental information, and I check that box, and maybe I got baptized and I have some behavior, then I'm going to heaven someday, one day. But salvation is actually about Jesus knowing us in the inner parts of our life and slowly changing us. See, I think we have talked about salvation in ways, if I can just say this, that is too much about just forgiving our past, what we've done, and then securing our future in heaven. And that's great that Jesus has forgiven our past. And that's great that we have a future life, a future home in the new creation. But what about here and now? What about the stuff in our lives right now that is broken and weak and hurting and messed up? The things, the disappointments that we feel. What about the me I want to be now? Salvation isn't just about our past. It isn't just about our future. It is about our real life here and now. That's why the Apostle Paul, the most prolific New Testament writer who probably wrote the most on what it means to be saved, talked about it in a past tense, I was saved, talked about it in a future sense, I will be saved, talked about it in a present tense, I am being saved now. This isn't just about being forgiven from our sin. This is about Jesus healing and restoring the effects of sin in our hearts and in our minds and in our relationships like this woman had, and in our psyche and in our shame and all of this stuff, and dealing with it in the here and now. That's what eternal life is. You know, when he says that the water will bubble up in you, a spring to eternal life, he's not talking about heaven. Eternal life, according to Jesus, was the word life meant zoe, like not just biological life, but life to the full. This vitality on the inside of us, like a spring of living water bubbling up. And the eternal meant never ending vitality, life to the full. Isn't that what we want? That's what we're longing for. That's what we ache for. That's what we dream we might be, we might have. And Jesus says, yeah, it comes from me knowing you and going into those hard to reach, hard to admit, hard to talk about places and healing them and restoring them and forgiving them and changing them. So don't be a Christian. Be known by Jesus. Be known by Jesus. Well, how do we do that? How do we give him access to those places in our lives? Well, before I give you a couple of practical steps to do that, I want to take a couple minutes just to give us space and time to become more aware of those places within us. That this is actually about us knowing ourselves. Someone once said years ago, to know God, you have to know yourself. To know yourself, you have to know God. This is about being known by Jesus and almost allowing him to have this conversation with us. So I just want you, I'm going to just read a couple of statements that I want you to think about. You don't have to write anything down. You don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to put your hand up. But just to give you some time to go, is this true? Is this somewhat true? Not really sure. Not really true, or not true at all about me, about what's going on under the surface of my life. And imagine that Jesus is sitting with you, just kind of like he was with that woman, having a conversation. So just reflect on these questions. True, somewhat, not really, not at all. It's easy for me to identify what I'm feeling inside. Very true, somewhat true, not really true, not at all. I resolve conflict in a clear, direct, and respectful way, without put-downs, avoidance, angry explosions, or going to a third party to talk about it instead. How true is that? I'm intentional about reflecting on and working through some of the painful or earthquake events of my past and my family background. I'm intentional about that. I often admit when I'm wrong and readily ask for forgiveness from others. I openly admit my losses and disappointments. How true is that? I'm able to enter into the pain and burden of others, loving them well without becoming over-responsible for them. Do I know how to do that? Do I do that regularly? Somewhat. Not really, not at all. I am able to slow down daily and weekly to spend quality time in the presence of Jesus. These are just a few questions that are meant to get at some of the areas that are under the surface, where the deep well, or the parts of us maybe that are parched and dry and empty and needing to have renewed or changed or transformed. Just to begin to allow us to become aware. And so my suggestion for you is, this was like an awkward conversation. It was an incredible one. It was one that led to transformation, but it was awkward at first. And so I want to encourage you to be courageous, to take time for an awkward conversation with Jesus. And that may look like a couple of different things. Those questions I read were adapted from a book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, that we've recommended many times through the years at our church, and through actually an emotionally healthy inventory. We actually have all of our board members go through a full inventory that have some of these questions in it. But you can download the full inventory here, and there's a QR code on the screen there that you can grab the whole thing. You can just snap it now and then save it on your phone and get it later, or you can email me if you want to get a copy of that. Maybe we'll send it out in the midweek. That you can just take time and actually just go through and say, what is under the surface of my life? It's really a way that Jesus can know you, that you can invite him to know you. You may want to read the whole book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, or another one we've recommended, Soul Care by Rob Reimer. Or you may want to book a renewal prayer appointment. A couple times a year, we have people who are trained in our prayer ministry who, if you would like it, would spend an hour and a half to 2 hours with you just praying for you. And it is kind of an awkward conversation. It's not bad. You don't have to, you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. They're not going to force you to say anything, but it's a space where you can process some of what's under the surface of your life and receive prayer for it. And ultimately, what that prayer appointment is doing is setting up a space for you to meet Jesus where you can be known by him. These are just a few steps that you could take to actually not just be a Christian, but to be known by Jesus. And even if you're like, hey, I'm still exploring, I'm definitely not a Christian, I'm just trying to figure this out, that these would be places where you would begin to, just like this woman did, she didn't know who she was talking to, and eventually became to understand who he was. I was struck by, and I want you to think about this as we finish, the difference between where that woman was at when she arrived at the conversation and where she was by the time she left. She arrived full of fear and shame and pain and probably cynicism, not really knowing who God was. She left there full of joy, full of courage, full of boldness, full of hope, running back into town, the very place that she was afraid of before, the very people that she was hiding from. She ran towards them with courage and joy and actually love in their hearts to say, come, meet him as well. That she was known by God. And here's the most beautiful thing about that. And the middle of those two things, where she was and where she left, was an awkward conversation. And here's what's beautiful about that. She didn't seek it out. She didn't even know she needed it. Jesus went out of his way to find her. And I wonder, maybe today you are feeling and realizing that Jesus has gone out of his way to find you, to start a conversation with you. Maybe an awkward one at first, but one that could lead to transformation in your life, where you would receive more courage, more joy, more hope, as you are known by Jesus.